Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Comics. I am your host, Jim Viscardi, VP of Business Development here at Image Comics, and this is the podcast where we go one-on-one with your favorite creators in the world of comics, where we talk about how they got in, why they got in, what they're still doing in it, and what they're looking forward to for the future of comics. Today's guest is someone who has been on an absolute tear in the creator-owned space. He is someone who has got currently a book out right now, Null Hunter. You may know him from The Silver Coin. He's got another huge project coming up, The Exquisite Corpses, with James Tynion IV. My guest today is Michael Walsh. Michael's career is a fascinating one to look at. Again, and it's funny because he's another one of, my returning guests, someone who I spoke to almost 10 years ago when he was just getting started in this game. And it's interesting because he's always had a foot in the creator-owned space. Regardless of the work that he took on at Marvel or DC or doing work for hire, he always was doing something that was either at Image or tied to it was a creator-owned in some form or fashion. Then The Silver Coin comes out. The Silver Coin is the book that he says, and I think everyone would agree with, that kind of really put him on the map. It's something that, it's a book where he basically built a shared universe for some of comics' best writers to play in, but he was the binding glue that kept it all together. And it was from there that really put on the map Michael's writing ability, his artistic ability, and his overall storytelling ability. The book changed the trajectory of his career, and now he's back at Image again with Exquisite Corpses, teaming up with James Tynion IV for something that feels like Friday the 13th meets Battle Royale. It's 12 killers, one small town, a cast of civilians just trying to survive the night. It's big, it's brutal, it's stylish, and still packed with heart. So we're going to get into how the Silver Coin kind of laid the groundwork for what is happening here and what it's been like building this new world from the ground up, how Michael has evolved as a storyteller and a designer along the way. And so this is a great chat. You're going to get a lot out of this. So I'm just going to stop chit-chatting at this point. You know the deal. Leave a review on Spotify. Leave a review on iTunes. If you are listening to this right now, stop what you're doing. Take a screenshot. Share it on social. Tag me. Tag Image. At Jim Viscardi. At Image Comics. At Let's Talk Comics. We'll share it. Let's get the word out about this show because we're getting so many phenomenal guests who are telling so many great stories that they need to be shared. And you can do your part by helping. All right. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's talk comics. Michael, welcome.
Hello, Jim. Thank you for having me.
Dude, we were talking a little bit before we got started that you and I did this a really long time ago. And it's one of those things where I've had it happen a few times with some guests, right? Like, I talked to Rick a little while ago, and Rick was my first guest, and it's wild how people's careers have kind of grown over these last 10 years. Like Rick is an interesting example because he is someone who had already kind of gotten his big start in comics and is already on like a 20-year career for him in this instance, but when you and I spoke back in like 2013 2014, you were really just kind of getting started, and I'd love to just start maybe just looking back on, like, do you ever kind of take the time to stop and smell the flowers in your career, over your career, or is it just a like, all right, we got a project coming up and we're gonna crush it and we're gonna move on, but like at some point you gotta just be like, oh shit, look at all of this, or right, or do you ever like look back at like a bookshelf and be like, I created and I worked on all of that?
I don't as often as I should. I think it's tough to do when I'm so busy. Like I'm usually working on 3 books at a time.
Right.
Generally speaking, lately is kind of my my go-to schedule at the moment is write a book for myself, write a book for another artist, and then work on a book with someone else writing it. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
almost always got three books kind of rattling around in my head. And that means that the real estate of my brain is usually pretty full. So I don't really think back on past work. And a
Uh-huh.
lot of the times when I look at my past work, all I can see are the things that I've learned since then and how my work
Right.
has improved. So it's not always like the most gratifying for me to look
That's
at it.
the ultimate artist dilemma.
Yeah,
I
the
feel.
ultimate artist dilemma. But when I do think of like the volume of work and how prolific I have been over the last 13 years of my professional career, it feels good to know that at the very least I've worked really hard.
Did you ever expect it to get to this point for you, or like was this kind of always the uh like I said, like your output between writing and doing art, and you throwing covers in between it all, all of it. I mean, obviously, clearly as a young artist, right? You wanted to be able to stay in it and make it big, uh, but like you said, like I love when did the decision to move to this plan of doing a book for yourself, doing a book for another artist, and then working with someone. When did that come into view for you? Do you feel that like as like this is the template and this is the kind of workflow I want to set up for myself?
Silver Coin essentially made that possible for me.
Mm.
Up to that point, I had been doing Marvel and DC and work for hire books for almost 10 years. And I kind of burned out on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing Justice League Black Hammer with Jeff Lemire, and getting to see firsthand working with Jeff the kind of success he's had in building his own worlds and his own properties while still being able to do work for hire stuff on the side and work on characters that he loved in that world. Um, it kind of made me change my direction a little bit as I was already feeling burnt out, and then working with Jeff and seeing how gratifying that was, like getting to work on it was weird because I was working on Black Hammer, which is Jeff's intellectual property,
Right.
and Justice League at the same time, and they were crossing streams. So it was this weird hybrid of work for hire and creator owned, but it really pulled me back into the idea that I want to get back into the creator owned world.
Mm-hmm.
So after I finished Black Hammer Justice League, I knew, like my whole career, I knew that I wanted to be writing my own work, but I was never
Right.
really afforded that opportunity. Especially early on, it's hard to pitch yourself as a writer artist when you have no work under your belt. People kind of want to see proof of concept in terms of what you're pitching them.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it was always easier just to get people to look at my art and to get editors to look at my art. It's so much easier to give somebody a piece of artwork and they can look at it and say, that's good, that's not good, I want to work with this person. But if you give something gives an editor a piece of your writing, they actually have to sit down and read it to figure out if it's
Mm-hmm.
any good. So early on in my career, I was naive and impatient. So I just started focusing primarily on art. But as time went and time passed, I just had the urge more and more to write for myself. And after I finished Black Hammer Justice League, I knew I wanted to do creator owned. I knew I wanted to write for myself. I'd done a few one shots and short stories in comics here and there in terms of writing, but I hadn't done anything as big as a mini series. So
Mm-hmm.
there was some hesitation on my part to pitch a mini series that I would write and draw for myself to Image. And I figured that the best idea would be for me to kind of hedge my bets, pull in a bunch of creators that Eric could not say no to, and then force myself in on the writing end of things.
Uh-huh.
But I mean, yes, I was hedging my bets, but at the same time, these are all creators that I'd already worked with, I built a rapport with, whose work I loved as a fan of the medium, and I wanted them to push into the horror genre in ways that I hadn't seen them do before, except maybe Jeff had done a little bit of horror stuff, but like I'd never
Mm-hmm.
seen Chip do horror. I'd never seen
Right.
Kelly do horror, and I thought it would be a really fun thing to bring them into this and really box them into a genre that I hadn't seen them work in before. So there was
Uh-huh.
like a lot of moving parts in my head of why I thought Silvercoin was going to work. And at first, we had planned it as a mini series with my high hopes being that I could do more with more writers if the first series was successful, and luckily enough it was, and that kind of put my name, I think, on a different platform than it had been
Mm-hmm.
previously, whereas before I was not necessarily a journeyman, but I was going from project to project drawing books, and I wasn't necessarily being brought on as someone that would sell books. And
Mm,
then after Silver Coin, then I think I was thought of more as a mover in comics, and I was given opportunities that I wasn't given previously. So
right.
that kind of afforded me the luxury of being able to really, really choose my next gigs. I think before that, there was never really a fork in the road in my career where I had
Uh-huh.
two books that I was offered, and it was a hard decision of what to draw. Before that, I was just like, I would finish a gig and something really cool would get offered to me, and I just float over to that one. But after
Mhm.
doing Silver Coin, then I had a lot of bigger choices to make in my career.
Interesting, interesting. So I guess then at that I do want to talk a bit more about Silvercoin in depth, but I guess at that point for you, it kind of seems like for you it has felt like, oh, I've arrived, right, in a sense. And so then when it becomes, when you have the opportunity to kind of, forge your own path in a sense, what then goes into the decision making process of what you pick next?
Yeah, it for me, it changed a little bit when I had a kid because I was about 2 years into Silver Coin, close to finishing up the third arc when me and my wife got pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
and I was soon to be a father. So then I knew I was going to take some time off with Silver Coin. When I had the baby, I took about 3 or 4 months off and ate up pretty much all of my savings at that point. So coming back into it, there was a balance of I need something that's financially a sure bet and also um, creatively gratifying. So
Mm-hmm.
when I came back into it, I was slowly working on the fourth arc of Silver Coin when I took a few gigs on Creep Show just to keep some cash flow coming in, and because
Yep.
I love the property and I'd always wanted to work with Alex Antone.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, he had said, we've got some of the Universal Monsters books available. Do you have interest in Frankenstein or, a few of the others? But Frankenstein is the one I initially really gravitated towards right off the bat. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's when I jumped onto Frankenstein and kind of have still been working on Silver Coin slowly in the wings. But Frankenstein was like a character that I loved, a chance for me to do work for hire in a different way than I had previously,
Sure.
more as the primary mover and storyteller of the book, and to get to completely shape the experience for myself with someone that I trusted, Alex Antone, who's a
Mm-hmm.
fantastic editor. So that's when I jumped back onto a work for hire book, kind of. But it did feel there's something about Universal's Monsters, Frankenstein, that did feel more like a creator owned book to me than um, my previous work for hire. I think the idea that I was able to really shape the aesthetic of the book
Mm-hmm.
and the tone and the voice of the characters, and I think writing it really helped me realize how I wanted to work on work for hire in the future as well.
Mm-hmm. You,
Uh,
and it's interesting because you've, like, even from the very early parts on your career, you've worked on independent, like you've worked on a ton of independent stuff.
yeah.
How do you feel that has helped? Um, helped is maybe the wrong word, but like more so, why was it important for you to always kind of keep a foot in those waters where, like even when you kind of did that stint, it's in a very heavy work for hire stuff, you were still doing stuff for you, and like what have you felt like maybe that you've learned, right? Because even up to silvercoin feels like was the biggest bet on yourself, kind of moment for you. But what maybe had you had learned up to that point on some of the independent stuff that gave you the confidence outside of the, obviously pulling together, the team of collaborators that you worked with for that to really push forward.
I find that for me, whenever I'm doing something more independent and creator owned, it does feel more fulfilling, and it does feel more like you're selling a book because of your own idea, because of these characters that you're developing, instead of selling a book because it's Spider-Man and you're, by chance on that book. So there
Right.
is a bit of a fulfillment and the support that you feel from the readers when you're doing a creator-owned book. When people, even if a creator-owned book doesn't sell that well, when people are coming and getting it signed and they love
Mm-hmm.
the characters and they're asking you about the world, like, there's something so much more gratifying to that than someone coming up and being like, who would win in a fight, Spider-Man or Wolverine? Like, it's just a totally different world in comics,
Yeah.
and they have very different fan bases, audiences, and you learn a lot from both. Frankly, like, you learn different lessons from doing work for hire and from doing creator own. But I do find every time I go back to creator own and then go do a work for hire book, it changes the way that I think about the work for hire book and changes my work. And I
Mm.
always feel a little less obligated to work within the framework of the house style or with what's in vogue at that publisher at the time. Like, the more creator owned stuff I do and the more audience I have for that creator owned stuff, it lets me have my own voice in work for hire more and more. And that's so
Mm-hmm.
hard to do early on when you're really young. I broke in really young, and I was kind of uh, not necessarily trying to people please, but I was trying to do the work that the editors would really like and that the audience of those books would really like, so that it would keep me in work at those companies. But now, whenever I do work for hire, I'm more so trying to do the work that I enjoy drawing and that I would like as a reader of comics to my
Mm-hmm.
taste, not
Right.
necessarily the taste of the audience of those characters.
Mm-hmm. So then, how do you feel that your taste has changed a bit, right? Like, because you mentioned, obviously you've gotten way more into doing, way more into the horror space, and that
Mhm.
is that something that you've kind of loved from day one and have been trying to find ways to just make work, or was that something that, like, as you've worked in different genres, horror was the one that was a little bit out of your reach, and so you wanted to get into and flex a little bit more.
I always wanted to do horror comics. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've been a fan of horror manga forever, and been like, there is a market for this. There's a
Mm-hmm.
market for horror comic books in the Western comic book market. Look at film. Look at how many horror movies are out all
Oh
the
yeah.
time, and they're not all great, but people go to see them because
Yep.
there's the communal experience of watching a horror movie. Excuse me, in the theater.
Mm-hmm.
And I even on some of my earliest podcasts, I was saying I want to do horror books. I want to do horror books, but editors keep saying there's no market for it. There's no market for it. And so I was pitching horror books and I was trying to push horror work for hire, like, subgenres within the main genre of
Right.
these books that I was working on. And people would say, there's not really a market for this. People won't buy it. People won't buy it. And now when you look at comics 10 years later,
Now we have
there's
too many
so
horror
many
books.
great horror books. It's crazy. And I was saying this forever, but it just takes a few to break through for that to really change the nature of what's being published.
Sure. Sure. It's just so interesting because uh you know you are one of the nicest people in comics, period. And so to have you go to some of these dark places in some of the horror stuff that you are doing, is always, uh, whenever that, regardless who the creator is, that part of it is always so fascinating for me, because it's always like, oh, they're working through some shit here. But like, but
I treat my audience as my therapist, okay? So I get all of the shit out that I need to get out on the page, and then, I've just gotten paid for going to therapy.
there you go. But I guess, for you, how would you say your your storytelling maybe has changed over the last little bit? Like, what is it about doing the work of comics, and then maybe, as I lose an earbud, doing the, and then applying it to some of the horror stuff that you've been doing, right? Like, how do you begin to balance all of that together, and how has that maybe evolved, maybe even just more recently? Does that make
That's a
sense?
tough one. Like, I think that when I look at my earlier work, it's kind of the thing that changes as you grow as a creator is where you're putting your time in
Mm.
and where you're spending your time. I think early on I was my pencils were really really loose,
Hmm.
and then I would spend a lot of time traditionally inking my pages, and now I'm penciling much tighter, and that way I don't have to spend as much time on the inking, and then at the end of the day I'm actually much happier with the pages,
Hmm.
because I was finding before, I would spend a lot of time laying things out and then pencil really really tightly, and then pencil really really loosely, and then spend all this time inking and then drawing in the inks, and all this time I spent drawing in the inks I could have been saving by spending that extra time just penciling tighter, and then I would have been happier at the end of the day, because a lot of times in my early career I would scan my inks and then I'd get them onto my computer to send off to the editor, and I wouldn't be completely happy with them, but I also didn't have time to go back in and mess around with them more before sending them off, because I was just under deadline pressure.
Hmm.
And so now that I've taken to penciling much tighter, I find at the end of the day I'm much happier with my pages. It means like
Because
a
you've
lot of
done a lot
time.
of that correction work a little bit more up front.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And a lot of times I'm not able to ink my pages traditionally anymore because I just don't have the time. But I'm happier with the pages at the end of the day, and I think I found that that's just what's more important for me. Like I do love inking, and I've inked like almost all of the first issue of Exquisite Corpses traditionally. So it was
Hmm.
really fun to get back to that, but it also took me almost twice as long
Sure.
as it took on a lot of the silver coin issues or on the interiors for Frankenstein, where I was inking primarily digitally.
Hmm.
Um, so it's just like I'm kind of putting more of my value into the page at the in print now than I am into having those traditional pages. But I mean, it changes project to project. It changes on what I'm focusing on. It changes on how much actual time I have to do the pages, like where
Hmm.
my deadlines are at. And then in terms of the storytelling, I think early on I was really, really focused on the clarity of storytelling
Right.
and the basic art of making sure we know where these characters are in relation to each other, that they're acting well, and that the page storytelling is really really clear. But now I'm still focusing on that, but I feel like I have that down, and I feel like that's kind of second nature. And now that I have that after 13 years of working in comics, I can focus a little bit more on making sure that each page is dynamic and more bombastic, especially on something like Exquisite Corpses, where
Hmm.
there are these 12 larger than life killers that you want to give a bit of real estate to on the pages that they're on, so that they can have these big dynamic moments. I've been thinking of them almost like boss introductions in a video game. When
Mm-hmm.
your character walks into the boss room and then the boss comes in that you're going to be fighting, and there's almost like a slow motion or a still frame of that boss with their name on it. And it's like,
Yes.
oh shit, this is who I'm about to fight right now. So I wanted to have these almost boss introduction moments for each of the killers in Exquisite Corpses. And, that was a really fun challenge for me to try and think of it that way and kind of change my brain around
Uh-huh.
and focus on what works in other mediums outside of comics. But it really honestly depends also just book to book in what I
Right.
think is important in that specific book in the genre. Like I think Silver Coin is much more um not necessarily grounded, because there are a lot of supernatural elements to Silver Coin,
Hmm.
but the scares in Silver Coin are more grotesque, and there's a lot more tension build up. I think that Exquisite Corpses has more action elements to it and more
Right.
thriller elements to the horror than necessarily like the very heavy hard horror of Silver Coin. So it's like playing into whatever elements I think suit the story more,
Hmm.
and then adapting the storytelling in that way.
Right. I
But
love
it's
that.
something that I think about a lot. Like I don't just draw onto the page and then send the pages off. I think a lot about the tone and the tension and the reason I'm making choices in storytelling when I'm
Hmm.
drawing a book.
especially when you're doing something creator owned, because that all of those choices do fall on you
Yes.
in that instance. All right,
Yeah.
so let's talk about Silvercoin for a bit, and then we can jump straight into Exquisite Corpses. But the thing that's fascinating for me about Silvercoin is, right, like you had mentioned, you brought together a bunch of other talent that Eric couldn't say no to, but that is almost, but in you doing that is almost like a weird crash course in working with a number of other writers that have crazy different approaches, in a sense, I would say, right? Like,
Mhm.
or was that maybe not the case? Like, how did you find, normally, right, when you're working on a book, you can learn and get to know your writer collaborators different ticks and their style and how they write. But in Silver Coin, it's a bunch of different writers all, working on this thing that you've been able to kind of thread together. Does it feel, did it ever at all feel like whiplash for you in having to like wrap your head around these
It
different scripts, or were they similar enough for you and everyone kind of bought into the idea that like you felt in what you were able to do, like I said, in kind of wrapping it all together, made it work?
I think that there is there at least was, and probably still is, a bit of a misconception in how an anthology story, how to maintain continuity in an
Mm-hmm.
anthology story. And I wanted to prove that wrong. And I wanted to prove wrong the idea that writers are the singular voice in comics. And if you have one writer and all these different artists, it doesn't matter because the story is always going to be by the same writer, so it's always going to feel the same. But it's not that way. I mean, every artist has a different way of drawing and brings a different voice to the story that they're telling. They have a different storytelling style. And I would argue that Silver Coin feels more like a bunch of pieces of a whole than a writer driven anthology, because
Right.
I think the artist has so much more to do, not more to do, but has such a huge footprint, handprint, fingerprint on the storytelling, that having the same artist for an entire anthology actually makes it feel more like it's part of one piece,
Mm-hmm.
than having one writer. And that was kind of something I wanted to prove. I don't know whether I did or not, but that was my intent. And the thing that it was nice about Silver Coin is that all of these writers kind of knew what my intent was off the hop. So all the scripts were relatively loose, and they were written usually after me and the writers would have a Zoom call initially to make sure that everything felt like it was part of the Silver Coin world. I've got a world Bible that says where the coin is at different
Mm.
times, and how the coin was created, the origin story for the coin, and I've got lists of characters that are reappearing characters, when they die, when they get the coin, when they see the coin, and what I've got, their intent when they don't have the coin, and if people want to rope those characters into their stories, they're able to. But
Mm-hmm.
I generally give the writers on Silver Coin free reign to kind of do what they want, as long as it works within the continuity that I already have established.
Mm.
Uh, but these writers on the first arc were all people that I'd worked with before, so I knew exactly what to expect, which is why I booked them
Sure.
for Coin, right? Like, so I'd done Hawkeye with Kelly, I'd done Black Hammer Justice League with Jeff,
Mm-hmm.
I'd done Spider Man with Chip, and I'd done Comeback and a bunch of stuff with Ed. Ed's one of my longest friends in comics, and someone I adore. So I wanted him as like almost an anchor point, like
Right.
to if
He's
I
my safe
needed some.
space.
Yeah, he's my safe space. And then obviously I wrote the last issue myself, and then the idea was always that within the scripts, I would integrate imagery or characters or things in the script that would tie everything together, and then would usually pay off in the last issue of every arc, so that it really did feel like one world where this was all happening. Um, and I think that's another way that makes it feel like one piece, one world, in
Mm.
respect to the other like horror anthologies that are happening right now, where they are kind of standalone stories. Silvercoin are standalone stories, but they
Right.
all tie together in ways that are really surprising and interesting, I think, for longtime readers. So
What
like the
was?
first arc,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
was that group of writers, and then the second arc, my idea was to pull in writers who I knew as friends, but I had never worked with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I got Rom, Matt, Vita, and who else was on the second arc? Rom, Matt, Vita. Oh, and Josh Williamson. That was a great arc. And then for this third arc, my idea was I wanted to pull in writers whose work I loved that I actually didn't know super well, and that's where I got Pornsack, Peachette Choate, and Stephanie Phillips. Um, and James actually was on the third arc, but I've been longtime friends with James, but we'd never worked together.
Mm-hmm.
And Johnny Christmas, who I was longtime friends with, and we hadn't worked together. But yeah, that was like a good opportunity for me to get Pornsack and Stephanie, whose work I really liked. Didn't really know them, didn't expect them to say yes, but I think for me that was a really nice opportunity to reach out to people who I liked and hope that they would want to work with me.
I love it. Okay, so the next one's a little bit of a two-part question because I want to know a bit about world building for especially for a project that other people are playing in. Feels like a way more daunting task than world building necessarily for yourself.
Yes.
Because theoretically you could kind of make up or learn some of the rules on the fly as you're doing it on your own. But when you're setting up this world, it's a lot. And so what were some of the I guess the most important things that you needed to make sure were a part of this world building, and what were maybe something that some of the things that surprised you as time went on and as the world began to grow?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think sometimes the characters that came back and people wanted to play with more were interesting. Like the first issue of Silver Coin ends with the firefighter picking up the coin. And then after that, it was a character that I kind of had thought I wanted to come back to. And then Ed had made the fireman die in his issue. And I was like, damn, the fireman is already dead, Lewis the fireman. But then as it went and we started going back in time more often, that was a character that I kept coming back to. So when it hit the third arc, I thought, I think I'm going to tell the story of what he did with the coin in between when he found it at the end of the first issue and when he died in the third issue. And I was talking to James about his issue on a call, and he said, oh, I love that character too. I'm going to put him in my issue. So he kind of became this human antagonist that is a part of the silver coin mythology, where there's all these stories about Lewis with the coin and his manipulation of the coin and the coin's manipulation of him that, I got to tell a little piece of that, but there's a huge bit of story there that I'm hoping to keep telling Lewis's story and all the people that, he encountered in his time with the coin. But yeah, I think it's just like the things that people latch onto and enjoy about the mythology are always things that I don't expect. I think the fourth arc, because I've got most of the scripts for that and I've drawn a bunch of it, that I think every story for that arc was really surprising to me because people came at it from directions that I wasn't expecting based on their other writing or based on past stories of Silver Coin. So I'm really excited for people to see what goes on in the fourth arc of Silver Coin. But yeah, I think, I kind of expect for the unexpected in Silver Coin because like I said, I give the writers complete free reign outside of a few little things that they need to keep in mind about where the coin was. And it's almost always surprising where people approach this from. Like when I got this, like when I was talking to Matt Rosenberg about it and he wanted to do a story about a janitor in an office building and have the entire issue be a 9-panel grid, I was like, Matt, this is not what I expected. This is going to be a pain in the ass, but the script is fucking amazing, man. Like it was such a good script when I read it, but I knew it was going to be a tough issue to draw, to just choreograph the entire thing through this 9-panel grid where each of the panels and a lot of the pages were one of the windows in the office building. It was a really fun, challenging issue, and I think it's one of the best Silver Coin issues for sure. But yeah, everyone just kind of, I like that every writer comes into Silver Coin with this, like, there's a bit of one-upsmanship, I think. I want this to be the coolest issue of Silver Coin. I want this to be the coolest issue of Silver Coin. And I appreciate that as someone who, always strives for the highest quality of work. especially in my creator owned stuff, I just want everything I do to be just as good as the last thing. So with Silver Coin, I think there's this idea that I want to maintain a consistent quality throughout it and make sure that everyone's doing their best work. And, every writer has always brought their A game to Silver Coin, which I really, really appreciate.
Mm-hmm. I love it. What was it like for you to then see all of the acclaim that came for Silver Coin? Because like this again, right? This is a project that, again, right, you took the bet on, and it was your first kind of real big baby shot at all of this, and then everyone fucking loved it.
It was very nice. It felt very good because, like I said, I'd been saying for years there should be more horror, and horror was starting to already pick up again in
Sure.
comics at that time. But I think that Silver Coin was a big part of that. I think it it reassured me that I was doing something right in my art, because art was such a big driving force in what Silver Coin was.
Mm-hmm.
The reviews of the issues that I wrote were always very, very positive. I think like my 3 issues that I wrote of Silver Coin were the highest reviewed almost of all the issues. So it also reassured me that, yeah, maybe the stories that I want to tell on my own have merit. Maybe my writing is actually okay. Maybe I do have things to say with new characters, I always like it's funny because early in my career I was so naive of my own work and my writing, and I was like, I'm good, I deserve all this stuff, I deserve to be, but you're in your early 20s and you're
Mm-hmm.
very sure of yourself and you haven't been beaten down yet, and you also just haven't worked enough to know what's good and bad, because I was somebody who was always very good at drawing, frankly. Like I was somebody who grew up and everyone was like, you're an incredible artist, you're an incredible
Mm-hmm.
artist. And then I went to college, and then I was one artist of 100 incredible artists that were told
Sure.
the same thing growing up, and then my marks went down because I wasn't trying hard enough. And as a young naive shithead, I thought that was because my teachers didn't know what they were talking about, and because I have my own issues with authority. So when I got out of college and I built my own portfolio and I got work right away, I was so sure of myself that I
Mm-hmm.
could do all these amazing things. And then as I went through my career and I learned more about the craft, and I realized how my own work wasn't as good as it could be, and I started working on my stuff, I became less and less sure as I learned more. So, the quality of my work and my own knowledge of the craft was going up, while my own self-assurance and
Mm.
naivety was going down. So by the time I was ready to start pitching my own writing, I was like, I don't know if this is any good. I don't know if my art's any good anymore. I don't even know what's happening. I just needed something to like reassure me that I was worthy to be in the position that I was in. And I think that Silver Coin gave me that little bump to keep going and to keep trying to do big things and tell stories that I thought were unique and original and of a certain quality.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, so it was just a like a very reassuring moment in my career. And then Silver Coin obviously like got nominated for Eisner Award
Mm-hmm.
and a Ringo, and had a lot of critical buzz, and fans really got behind it. And it's always like, it's my baby. Silver Coin
Yeah.
will always be one of my babies. It changed my career, and it's a story that I love. Even if I wasn't drawing it, I think I would be reading it. That's
Mm-hmm.
that kind of book. So I just it's one of my great loves of the projects that I've done in my career.
So in Silver Coin, it was your kind of first real big, you know, building a world, building the mythology, and all that. And then I want to talk a little bit at least about one of the favorite books I'm reading, kind of month in and month out, is Null Hunter,
Yeah.
where you are reinterpreting mythology in a sense. And so what are some of the biggest differences there in looking at some mythology through a different lens, and for Null Hunter, why this one specifically?
Null Hunter is an interesting one because it's such a swing in a totally different direction from the other work that I'm doing right now. Although
Yeah.
it does integrate some elements of body horror, because I think they are a big part of what cyberpunk is and can
Mm-hmm.
be, this idea of like cyber horror, body horror, But anyways, besides that, like subgenre thematic connection, like I've just always been a huge fan of Greek mythology. I
Hmm.
grew up with all these mythology textbooks, and I would pore over them because I just thought they were so fun and interesting, and they have similarity to superhero comics, which I grew up on as
Yeah.
well. You know, there's these huge, really big worlds and mythologies, and these godlike characters, and these nefarious, evil creatures and monsters. And so, you know, I wanted to do this mashup book that was a retelling of the 12 Labors of Hercules with the aesthetics and themes of a cyberpunk story, and I wanted to sci-fi techify like all of the supernatural elements, the gods and the creatures and the powers of the mythology, almost not necessarily as a writing exercise, but just as like a brain challenge to kind of
Hmm.
get better at writing, to get into the world building of something like this. And I also wanted to work with another artist, and I wanted to be able to write for other people more and learn from that experience. And I was a huge fan of Gustavo's work already.
I was gonna say, where did you come across Gustavo's stuff? Because like his stuff is
He's
so
so
good.
good. Yeah, he was doing I came across his work on a Kickstarter because he was
Okay.
kickstarting some of the Peruvian cyberpunk stories he was doing. So
Mm.
I kickstarted a couple of his one shots of Peruvian cyberpunk, and I was like, this guy, more people need to be looking at this guy's work, and
Yeah.
like his character designs and his storytelling, excuse me, are just so interesting and singular that, you know, I really wanted to just get him out there into the world, and I felt like this was the perfect story um for the way that he draws and the way that he thinks,
Hmm.
and so we joined up and we did this thing, and it's been an absolute blast. You know, I am very excited for to get the collection
Yeah.
out into the world, because I feel like the bookstore market of people who really like the mythology stuff
Hmm.
is really gonna latch onto it and really love it.
Yeah. I needed to make sure that we talked about that at least a little bit because, like I said, that is legitimately one of the my most look forward to. Oh, that PDF came in great.
Yes. Oh, I just finished the issue 9 script, and it's like full on body horror, and uh it's like body horror mixed with like Lawnmower Man cyberspace fighting, and
Yeah.
it's so like it's just such a fun book for me to
Well,
write. I'm always just writing the scripts like with my mad scientist hat on, just being like, how wild can we get in this?
well, I think that that's one of the interesting it it it's so one of the things I love about this is that this feels more uh, high octane
Yes.
than some of your other stuff, and I really think that is really on display. And so I'd love to if you'd indulge me just for another question or two is when you're working with Gustavo, so like now this is you, someone who obviously very well understands the art side of this. How do the two of you work together in a way to really emphasize a lot of the action the action that goes into this book.
Yeah, I well, for me, like I think Gustavo does action like nobody else in
Mm-hmm.
comics. The way he lays out his pages with he doesn't use your typical horizontal panel structure in a lot of the
Right.
action stuff. He's making the panel shapes just completely dynamic and interesting. So whenever I'm writing the action scenes, I choreograph them in the script, but I don't really talk about the panel layouts.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times I'll say like, you know, Clay will shoulder someone onto the ground and grab their arm and twist their arm, and I will choreograph the action beats, but
Mm-hmm.
then I won't actually like panel them out on the page because I want Gustavo to just go crazy and
Mm.
let his imagination run wild. And even in the action choreographing that I'm doing in the script, I say to Gustavo almost always, and he knows this about
Sure.
the scripts and the way that we work together, how collaborative it is like, if there's a better way for you to draw this, Gustavo, if you want to make a big beat a different place on the page and give something else more real estate than is in the script, you do it. Like, go
Mm-hmm.
wild, because I know that he's going to do something way more interesting than I even scripted anyways, because our brains work in different ways. You know, that's just the nature of storytelling. So for me, it's more about making sure that the dialogue is tight and like the character stuff is there all in the script, and then almost every issue has an action scene of some kind or another. Some are longer, some are shorter. Like issue 2 is essentially a 20-page action set piece where Clay is just moving up a high-rise building, battling through the
Yep.
gang that is based on the Hydra from Greek mythology. But yeah, so it really is a super collaborative experience, which I think is usually the way to get the best art from an artist, is to really
Right.
trust them and to know where their strengths are. Um, and yeah, and you know, early on, I said to Gustavo and to the entire team on Null Hunter, was like, I want this to feel like John Wick in space. And I want a lot of storytelling to happen in the action and not to have too many moments of exposition. I want the world building to be peripheral. You know, if someone they're walking down the street, I want there to be a lot of world building in the design of the world, not necessarily in the way that Clay is like, this is this and this is this and this is this and this is this. So
Yeah.
Clay is essentially almost a silent character. He
Mhm.
doesn't talk very much at all, and it lets us just absorb the world as a viewer, as a spectator of what's going on throughout the comic. So I was, you know, trying. You know, there's a lot of intent and a very sparse script in Null
Mhm.
Hunter, and there's like a lot of stuff in the script that, you know, isn't put into words when you're reading the comic, but it's there on the page because Gustavo's just drawing the hell out of it, and he's building this world out and designing the world. It just has such like an interesting look and feel to it. I really love it. I'd love to
Mhm.
see more of it too. So I'm hoping, you know, that people come out and support the trade when it comes out.
Yeah. The last kind of piece that really pulls this whole thing together is obviously the coloring on this book,
Oh, I know.
where you know, right, like you know, it obviously very much wears it's the cyberpunkish influences on you know, on its sleeve, but the choices that, like, even outside of just like the overall kind of look of it, like even the way that certain scenes are colored and change it, like how for you, you know, how does that kind of factor into some of the storytelling decisions and things that you're doing there? Because like I said, like it really just
Yeah, for that, honestly, that's mostly almost all Gustavo.
okay.
You know, early on we did some preliminary studies and
Mm-hmm.
um, almost like tone guides about what kind of color we were looking for and how we really wanted to push the neons and the cyberpunk aesthetic. You know, sometimes I'll write into the page like, this needs to be a really dark scene because this is the time of day, or this planet
Mm-hmm.
has this vibe because of this sun or like space station in the distance. But a lot of that is just totally Gustavo setting the mood on his own terms, which, you know, I really appreciate, obviously, as someone who's a big
Right.
fan of color and being thoughtful with color while you're working and not just coloring things the way that they would look if you were like outside on a
Mm-hmm.
regular day. I like to think of coloring as a way to develop atmosphere, and Gustavo is
Mm-hmm.
completely in the same mindset. So we're just like in the same headspace of what colors can do in comics, and I just totally trust him. If I don't have like a little note about, you know, what I think it should look like, he just goes wild with it, and it always
Right.
is so cool. Yeah.
So great. All right, let's talk about Exquisite Corpses, because this is now kind of going through my little through line here, right? So, you know, Silver Coin, you're building you're building your own mythology. Null Hunter, you're adapting some mythology. Now, Exquisite Corpses, you're now co-building this world
Hmm.
with a number of other folks. I mean, you know, mainly James and all that. Um, when you have to build a world with someone else, or when you are building a world with someone else, uh what kind of is there a little bit of give and take, right? Like, so James has said that, like, you know, when you guys were talking about Exquisite Corpses, you know, the whole idea for this was, you know, you guys kind of got like a writer's room together, and like there's a lot of people throwing out a bunch of different ideas, but really, you know, it's you and James are kind of the guiding hand of all this. How do you even begin to conceptualize a process like this and then put it into action?
Yeah, it was. totally, Exquisite Corpses was totally unlike anything I've ever done in comics in so many different ways. As
Mm-hmm.
you know, as a creator-owned book, they're always collaborative, but this really felt like it was me and James's baby. It didn't feel like, a lot of times I think for artists, they get brought onto a project, a creator-owned project, after the idea is already firmly established and the characters are created, or at least conceptualized by the writer. But with James, when he first approached me for this, it was literally just, do you want to do a battle royale comic with 12 killers? And that was kind of it. Like, there
Right.
wasn't a lot there yet. And I think because he approached me so early with such a kernel of an idea, both of our fingerprints are all over
Mm-hmm.
Silver or Exquisite Corpses in totally different areas of the book too. Like, I think also, though, the thing that helps about that is that me and James have a lot of the same influences, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of the same storytelling preferences. We both love characters and character work, and really making you fall in love with a character before you do awful things to them. That idea that all of these characters should feel real and lived in, no matter how big or small they are in the story. So, we approach stories in very similar ways, which made it easy right off the hop to just start like tackling different things in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like we had that first call, and then I started figuring out killer designs and killer stories, and he started working kind of on the civilians. And then we came together at, the very first summit that we did was just me and James and the Tiny Onion team, and
Mm-hmm.
we got together in Buffalo, locked ourselves up in a room, and then started just beating on the world. So then we started establishing the setting and what this small town would look like, and started talking about some of the families, the rich families that are in control of the killers. Which that was like that feels like that was more from James's mind,
Mm-hmm.
the families, because I was working on, he was working on the families, and then I was working on the city, and the different locales in the city and where some of the set pieces would take place. So we were really just like, felt like we would tackle something, on our own, and then we would come together, and then we would talk it out, and integrate new ideas from each of us individually. So it just felt so collaborative in a way that creator owned stuff, even in the past, hadn't felt to me, because it really felt, sometimes it feels like on a creator owned book, a writer will come at you with an idea, and then you'll sketch out some of the different characters in the locales, and then all of a sudden you're drawing it. You're
Mm-hmm.
drawing the first issue. With this, we spent almost a year and a half developing the story and the characters in the world before James even sat down to script it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was just so much build up and so much development that it felt already so fully realized by the time I got the script for the first issue. Not only did I know what was going to happen, but I knew what every character would look like, what
Right.
everything in that world looked like, where the story was going. Like, I've never worked on something where I had this big of an idea of what everything was and what it would look like and where it would go before I actually started drawing it. A lot of times you're not afforded that time, especially in creator owned, where a lot of times, I don't want to get too much into the financial side of things, but a lot of times when you're doing a creator owned book, you're not getting paid until a few months after the book comes out.
Right.
So being able to work on a book for 2 years before getting paid is
That's a lot.
not fiscally reasonable,
Right.
right? Like, you just can't do that. But just because of the way that we had set this book up, and because of the help of Tiny Onion, we were able to get a lot of this done in advance, and to almost work on this as if it was a big two book.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we were able to do things, that we were able to go big in ways that you're just not able to do very often. And it felt so gratifying to have the structure to facilitate something like this. It
Mm-hmm.
was, yeah, I think this is like the best you can get for
I love
a
it.
creator owned experience, honestly.
All right.
So
Well, so
that,
before.
we had all these pieces in place. We had all the characters. We had the beginning of the story. James had written the first issue, and I had set like written, or I hadn't written the second issue, but I had the big beats in my head. So
Mm-hmm.
after James had sent in the first issue, I had some ideas of the characters that we wanted to pair up together, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of who would be really interesting of a killer to set up beside this civilian, and why would that be interesting. And I had a lot of these ideas going into the writers room, where we pulled in four of the greatest writers in comics right now, all different voices, and we said, here's the first issue. Here's who we're thinking would be really interesting to pair together in terms of killer fights, killer rivalries, and then also who would be interesting in the civilian world to encounter this killer, and why would that be interesting. We brought that into the room, and then we kind of just said, go crazy, go wild. And then, we took 3 days and we wrote the entire story, essentially, or we planned out the entire story, and then we sent all the writers home to write their respective issues. It was just an absolutely wild and amazing electric experience.
I love it. Okay, so before we get too far into some more of the process and the experience of putting the book together, let me give you. I want to give you the opportunity to just kind of say what the book is about.
Okay. That's a good idea.
Because here's the thing: we're gonna get into it. People are gonna get excited, and they'll be like, "Holy shit!" And then we should really tell them what this one in particular is about.
Okay, so Exquisite Corpses is about a once every 5 year battle royale between 12 of the world's most dangerous serial killers. They're dropped into a small town, and they each represent one of the ruling families of America. The last killer standing wins for their family, and they establish who will run America for the next 5 years.
Love it. So,
but that said, long pitch.
okay.
The longer version of this pitch, the story is about the civilians. The story is not about the killers. The heart of the story is the civilian characters who we're following, and we're just hoping that they can survive and get through the night, right? It has the tone of something like a Friday the 13th. These killers are larger than life. A lot of time they're in the background, and they are the horror element of the book. They are the big monsters, the big bad. They are not our protagonists. We're following a group of mostly innocent civilians, and getting into their character, and they are our viewpoint. They are the introduction to this small town called Oak Valley, and they're the people that we're gonna root for. Although you might root for a killer or two here or there, you can't help get behind a sociopath sometimes.
Okay. So with that, so I've been in talking to some folks about this book or whatever. This book, this series feels like this feels like summer blockbuster kind of like comic event type of thing, right? Like I'd say it's got the feel and the scale of what you'd expect from kind of big event comics, but like with indie heart, and truly like this is you guys are doing stuff in this book that you will not find in events happening in big superhero books, right? And so there's a level of unpredictability in what's going on here. And so let's start with the killers first, because you had mentioned in coming up with the killers and designing the killers, you wanted them all to feel incredibly unique and almost have, and even in some of the promotional stuff you guys have done, in introducing some of them online, they've got big anime, big manga feeling, a big manga feel to it, right? And I think that is something that can 100% bring that audience here into this book. And so in designing these characters and setting them up, what were kind of some of the key tenets, and how do you start with a cast of 12 killers and make them feel so different?
I think for me, there was the intention was to have a lot of contrast between killers. It's just design 101. Contrast is really important. And with these killers, I wanted to make sure that there was a lot of difference in the way they were designed, but also just like every silhouette needed to look different. So there's 12 different silhouettes for each killer. I like to draw a lot of shadow, and that the other artists that we've brought onto this book are the same. We tried to make sure that all of the art styles were similar in some ways, and some of the ideas of what they were going to do were similar. But I think it would be like I'd draw one killer or design one killer, let's say the Fox Mask killer, and I'd say, well, we've got a petite, you know, Japanese manga inspired samurai woman. What would be something that would contrast really well against that? Well, why don't we do like a giant monstrous circus MC performer with a huge hammer? Okay, well, what would be totally different than that? Let's have a small meek man that just looks like a nurse that you would meet at the hospital every day. You know, so it was just like trying to bounce back and forth between like high concept and then real looking, real life possible killers, and having that kind of contrast on the page is also really interesting, because you know, if you've got one of these people fighting another person, how could you ever expect one to win? But it's not always about the big action. Sometimes in this, it's about the creep factor of like, there's a small nurse with a creepy smile, and he has probably a higher body count than any other killer in the book. What is he about to do here, right? You know, so
Mm.
there's the idea that you can expect the unexpected, not only with the design of the killer but with their actions throughout the book. um, you know, we've got like the congregation who has been cutting people's faces off and sewing them to his own flesh, and then we've just got like a little Cub Scout boy. So you've got all these different kinds of ideas of what a killer can be and what evil can look like, and I thought that was a really fun thing to play with.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So in that, when thinking about that, right? Like the point I want to take is you mentioned how important like some of the silhouettes are, right? But just because in especially for a book that that is horror kind of at its core, that looming element as a storytelling device is always the one that lets you know, like, oh shit, something bad's gonna happen here. So I guess I'd like to talk a little bit more, like, so you've worked on creating identities for these civilians and personalities, and also the same thing for the killers. Obviously this is a very big, very you and James driven, kind of thing, but you're also working with a ton of other people in building the world out. Is it an instance where like you basically just kind of hand over a Bible and say, all right, here it is, go, kind of go have fun, or where does are there aspects of folks' personalities, the creators themselves, that come out or get imbued into some of these characters just based off the unique creative process you guys have been doing here?
Well, because once we established all the writers that were going to be on this book,
Yeah.
we wanted to make sure that it didn't feel like an anthology, in a way that there was like each issue felt like different people coming on and the characters didn't have the same voices throughout.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided to do a writer's room, and we got all of the writers together in a room in Buffalo, and we literally like plotted out pretty tightly the entire 13 issues in the room. So like I said, James opened up with his first issue. I broke down the second issue in the room, and then we passed off to the next writer in the lineup, and they said, I want to write this character because I like them. I want to put this character together. And then we would talk about how that could work within the framework of the story, with the ideas of how James maybe wanted to end it. And you did see, for sure, some writers were more attached to certain killers, or they had specific things they wanted to do with that killer, because I think that killer or that civilian really played off their voices as a storyteller. So you saw people like, I think Pornsack got really attached to Laura, one of the civilians, and I think Pornsack really took the helm with that character, developing her and figuring out her arc and her voice. I think Che did a really good job with Fox Mask Killer and with Audrey. I don't want to spoil too much, right? Because I don't want people to know what's coming in which issues, but different writers were attached to different characters because they played to their strengths as a writer. And we knew that instantly because in the room, me and James could see it. We could see who people were attracted to. You know, Tyler Boss, I don't think it's a spoiler to say, but like he liked Rascal Randy a lot, you know, and
I've also heard that is one of James's favorite characters as well.
I think it's honestly one of everybody's favorite. There's something about Rascal Randy that is pulling people into this book, and you know, in the playing of the game that I created for the book, also you can get to see who people are drawn to because at the beginning of any game that you play of Exquisite Corpses, the game, you get to pick the killer that you play as, and Rascal Randy is almost always one of the first killers picked. Everybody wants to play as this little rascally, terrifying bunny with two mouths.
I love it. So it's we will talk about the game in a second, but one of the things I would be remiss to not bring up is I want to talk about some of the covers, only because I was just talking to Kurt Piers about Lost Fantasy, and like one of the things that I love about Kurt has a fairly strong design eye and is very, you know, is someone who admittedly says like I want my covers and I want my books to stand out on the store shelves because there's so many books out. And like I feel what you've done with Exquisite Corpses is 100% nail the mission there, right? Like these are the. So I'd love to talk a little bit about everything from some of the design elements to, but where I'd like to start though is why Fox Mask Killer first, and then also too it's a cover that works in a number of different ways because I think you look at that cover, you see Fox Mask Killer, you see that the logo is nice and big, kind of up top, but then like if you look at the cover just even for a second or two longer, you see everyone else kind of back there. And so there's a lot happening there that all works in concert. So can you kind of walk me through the process of the cover? Because it's a theme that goes straight through to the second cover, and I assume, you know, for the rest. So like why was that important, and how do those elements begin to come together?
It was the cover for the first issue of Exquisite Corpses was one of the most challenging things about the entire project, honestly, because not necessarily in the drawing of the thing, but conceptually of what I wanted to do on the cover. How do you take a book that has 12 characters that could all have their own comic series in their own right, that have all varying different kind of iconic looks to them, and they're not even the main characters of the book? How do you take a book like that and then make sure that you're doing something iconic with all of that visual information that also stands out on the shelf, that also pulls you in, that also gives you an insight of the vibe and the tone of the book? Like there was so much to think about, and I beat my head over a brick like for months and months about what I should do on this cover. But as I started figuring out the tone of what I wanted the design to look like of the book, because I'm also, you know, when I went to school for design. I went to college for design, and my major was in illustration, but I was taking graphic design courses throughout college. And so design is a very important thing to me on all of my books, especially on my creator owned, where I'm able to get my grubby mitts on that side of things. And so with Exquisite Corpses, I knew that I wanted to pull from the aesthetics of, you know, punk DIY concert posters, of manga, of video games. I wanted to pull in reference points from non-comics multimedia all over the map. And for me, you know, there's within this story, so like within this Exquisite Corpses story, there's reason for this. There's a local band that's a bunch of young adults called No Life, and a big part of the story is that, you know, there's characters trying to get to a concert that they're doing at a local Legion Hall. So this idea of the No Life show is this kind of thing that's moving through the first issues of the story, and I liked the idea of using that element of like a bunch of kids putting together flyers for their show. That kind of aesthetic is what we're bringing into the overall design choices that we're making throughout Exquisite Corpses on kind of like one side of design. So there's like kind of two streams of design that we're thinking. There's the punk DIY show poster design that is kind of like the overarching design choice of what we're
I can
doing.
100% see this like stuck up on a wood panel construction site in
Yes,
New York City. 100%.
exactly. And that's
Yeah.
what I want this to feel like. And then the other stream of design is the design of all of the stuff that is done by the 13 families, who are the nefarious underworld rulers of America, and their stuff is very streamlined and sharp looking. So there's this a very strange juxtaposition of these two design choices throughout the book. But as I started figuring out these aesthetics, it led me to the idea that I could do these almost risographed looking show posters where I would have one of the killers and then a bunch of elements behind the killer, either from the issue and from what happens inside that issue or from things that are coming in the book, and I could have those in like blocky line on line colors to not take away from the one element that's supposed to stand out and pull the reader in. So then once I figured out that would be a good framework for all of the covers across the series, then it was about deciding, well, who is going to be the focal point of that first issue? Who is the killer that is most going to pull people into looking at that cover closer and seeing all of the other killers in the background? And for James, he was instantly drawn towards Fox Mask Killer. I think the first killers we designed were Fox Mask Killer, Gamer Kid, Rascal Randy, but Rascal Randy was actually a rat at first. So going into the first story summit, Rascal Randy was Randy the Rat, and he had rat ears and a similar look, but he didn't have the mouth under the mouth. And then I think it was at the first story summit, I was talking about my inspiration to the Tiny Onion group and to James for Randy the Rat. And I was talking about this video that was a meme and that was went viral online a few years ago of somebody wearing an Easter Bunny costume and running into a kid's party, and it's like the creepiest Easter Bunny costume ever. And all the kids start screaming and crying, and it was like it just lives in my brain rent free. And I was talking about that video, and I was like, well, I should just make this guy a rabbit, because I think that the rabbit ears are something that would give this silhouette just that extra push to pop through. So that was where Rascal Randy came from. So we had to change it from Randy the Rat to just this Rascal Randy, right? Because I wanted to keep the alliteration.
I love alliteration, so you got me.
Yeah, same. As such, like, I grew up on superhero comics, and that
Right.
and it's just all over the place there. So I'm a big fan of alliteration. But
Yeah.
I was tossing back and forth between like Rascal Randy, Fox Mask Killer, Lone Gunman. I think there's some of these killers just like have that kind of standout iconic look that could really honestly drive its own book. But like instantly, I think in the first lineup of the 6 killers, James just was so pulled into Fox Mask Killer, and I really obviously trust James's sense of character and characters that audiences will latch onto. Just look at Eric Slaughter, just look at the things that he's done in the past with his other books and his ability to create a single iconic character that can drive a book. I think nobody else in comics can do that like James. So him saying Fox Mask Killer is the one, let's go with Fox Mask Killer, I was just like, okay. I didn't second guess. I'm not going to second guess the guy that I'm collaborating with, that we're putting an immense amount of trust in each other on this book. And James said, let's go with Fox Mask, because I think that's the one that people are going to be drawn to. I think that's the one that people are going to want to cosplay.
I was sort of say, like, it's incredibly cosplay. It's an incredibly cosplay friendly design. I think that first cover image is so striking in the sense that, like, it also, like, that is a character that I feel like could show up in Fortnite, right? Like, in all things like that. And so it is just, like I said, it works great. Who did the logo?
I did. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So early on, like I was saying, when we were just establishing the aesthetic of the book, I said, well, if we're gonna go with this punk DIY aesthetic for a lot of the design choices, why don't you guys just let me draw out the logo with a giant brush? I've got
Yeah.
this huge sumi brush that I got in Japan when I was there. So I just wrote Exquisite Corpses in a brush and ink on a paper, literally hundreds and hundreds of times. And then I took all my favorite characters from all the different times I wrote that down and compiled them into what became the logo. But again, we have a cover that has 12 different design elements right on the front. So I was like, I want the cover to be, or the logo to be really big on that front cover,
Mm-hmm.
but still stand out. So I said, why don't we just do just a huge black ink bar across?
Mm.
And that way we can see the logo, we can see the names of the creators on the book, and then we'll use that um, as the format for all of the covers for the main A covers for the series, and then we can just use that logo as well. So
Mm-hmm.
that was kind of where we were coming from. I just wanted to make sure that the logo was super visible, and if you had the book on the shelf, you'd be able to see it from across the room,
Yeah.
right? And by making sure that each cover only stuck to two colors, I was able to simplify and simplify and simplify, which is something that I'm always trying to do with art and writing in general. Is like, as I draw something, I'm like, what can I take out? What can I
Mm-hmm.
take out? What can I remove and still make this readable? And that's really important on these covers because there are so many design elements on them. It's like, how can I simplify the background line so we get this striking visual of one of our killers, and then we're able to actually have a lot of visual information on the cover when you look closer.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so much thought went into
Yeah,
that first
no, I
cover.
mean it's very clear, and I think, like I said, I think you guys nailed the assignment. I think it works, but
Thank
I
you.
think it also creates because you've got it. I don't mean to simplify it this way, but so templatized in a sense, right? It
Yeah.
creates that sense of continuity that you can keep.
Yeah.
That they'll look great. Like if someone were to just like stick them all up on their wall or whatever, like there's that sense of oh, these all look like they belong together in a sense, as opposed to, some covers that may just be depicting scenes or whatever. And yes, they all kind of have the same feel, but like these really feel like a set, which goes into what we should probably talk about next is the trading card game, or the game, the card game element
Yeah.
of this, because I think it's one of those things where I don't think enough folks know that you also like moonlight as a magic card artist, as in and also you've done a bunch of other things in the game space. And so James has said that this is something that you kind of came in fully baked with, like you knew what you wanted this to be,
Yeah.
and kind of ran with it. So where did that sort of come from, and what were, what were some of the challenges that you felt you needed to try and work out with this? Because this feels like a totally different muscle group that you have to work out, because it's not just like, yeah, you're designing the cards, but you also brought to the table here's how the game can work, which
Hmm.
is, that's not putting comics together.
No, it's very different. It's very different. So on one of our first calls about me and James on Zoom or whatever about Exquisite Corpses, I think we were talking about that, like, just right off the hop, that me and James just had this feeling like this could be big. Like
Mm-hmm.
this is a really interesting world. These characters are so fun. People are gonna get behind this. And as we were talking about it, we were like, oh, this would be a great video game. This would be a great movie. This would be a great um, a card game or board game. And as we were talking about it, like, yeah, it would be a great card game. I wonder how it would work as a card game. And,
Mm.
I started thinking more and more on that. And then it was like, I wonder how hard it would be to build like a simplified strategy card game. And, I've been working as a Magic the Gathering artist for 5 or 6 years. So I've gotten a little bit of more insight into how those kind of games are built, how the play testing works, how the structure of something happens, and how long it takes to balance. And so I have a little bit of extra insight in that world. And as as we were coming up on the first summit, it just kind of like I think my brain subconsciously was working on the problem, which is
Mm.
something that happens a lot when you're making comics. You know, a lot of times if I'm stuck on a story element or something, I'll spend a day drawing a page, and then when I come back to think about that story, somewhere in my head, some mouse was running in a circle and a ball, and then working the story out for me. And then when I come back to it, anything that I was having trouble with, a lot of times I've figured out a solution. Like, it just happened so quickly. So, you know, as me and James just talked more and more about the idea of maybe doing a board game or a card game or like a werewolf type social strategy game, my brain was just kind of working on it. And over months and months, I'd once in a while I'd give it some thought and think about it. I think like for 6 months between the first call and the first story meeting, or 8 months or something like that, between that first call with me and James and then when we had the summit, my brain was just thinking on the game and how it could work, how it would work to have some role playing elements, to be able to choose your killer, and you know, for an audience, for fans of the book, to be like, I wish this killer had won the games, and to actually be able to figure out, you know, to dictate how the story goes, and to have some of those role playing elements as well, you know, because you're always I'm oftentimes at a convention and people will come up to me and be like, you know what would be a great idea for this book? I've got a great silver coin idea, and this was what would happen, and this was, and so like in my mind too, it was almost like, let's bring the audience and the readers in a way where they can tell the story of these characters and they can decide who lives and who dies, you know? So that was a big part of the thinking in my mind, is how to
Mhm.
keep on gamifying this property and to make it fun for everybody in all these different ways that we've never seen comics do, or we at least haven't seen them do in a long time. And as I brought these white cards, these white erase cards with me, to the first story summit, and my plan was like, as we were breaking the story and stuff, I'd be kind of fiddling around with the game and figuring out, you know, how it could work. But like as I was driving, because I drove to Buffalo and it was about an hour and a half, I kind of cracked some of the problems in my brain on
Mm.
how it would work as a card game. And when I got there, um, you know, I had all these ideas. So right that first day, we worked for a few hours, and then on lunch break, I took all of the white erase boards and I wrote down all the killer cards, and I wrote down all the mechanics of the game and how it would work. And then after we finished that day, I said, you know what, let's just play this initial, you know, beta version of what this could look
Mhm.
like and see how it feels to play this with a group of 10 people. And we did it, and it felt so fun and so good, and it felt already kind of tuned and balanced in a way that we were all honestly kind of surprised. Like, I was surprised as the one that created the game that it worked so well right off the first version.
Right. Like, oh
I think
shit, it worked.
the Tiny Onion people were like, "What the fuck? Like, how did this just happen?" Because I had just literally wrote it all down on whiteboards,
Right.
white erase cards, and just like put it out on the table, and we did the thing, and it worked so well. And you know, we had talked about hiring a design team for the game, but at that moment, I think we realized that, you know, the game was almost there. At this point, it was going to be more about balancing and integrating other elements of the game.
Mhm.
So, you know, over time, I integrated a whole other part of the game. You know, as more details about the game come out, there's going to be, so besides the 12 killer cards, what a big part of the game is called the event deck, and that is an event deck with moments from the comic book. And as you pull from that deck, it will change the board state and change the game while you're playing it in fun and random and unique
Mhm.
ways. So, you know, it's more of a strategy, social strategy light, with RPG elements, light card game elements, but it's just more about like building alliances, attacking guys because you know, they drank your beer the last time you saw them. Like you know, it's not
Right.
supposed to be like overly competitive. It's a
Yeah.
very fun party game, and you know, I hired a group of play testers, which are a bunch of the people that I play board games and Magic with,
Mhm.
and they're a bunch of very smart creatives that work in all different creative fields.
Mhm.
So over the last year and a half, we've been playing the game, play testing it, balancing it, integrating new elements, making sure every killer is viable and can win. You know, and that's one of the fun things about it, is that, you know, I've seen every single killer from the comic win a game of the Exquisite Corpses
Mm.
game. So, you know, that was really important to me, was making
Yeah.
sure that,
That it was
characters that
balanced.
aren't necessarily, they don't last long in the book, you know, like some killers die pretty early, you know. Who that is, you'll have to buy the first issue to find out. But you know, those killers can win the card game. If you love that killer, don't worry, because they could win the Exquisite Corpses game when you get it in your hands, you know.
That's
And
amazing.
that's one of the really fun things, you know. And there's and one of the things I love about it is getting to see who people get attached to from the group of killers. I have this one friend who picks Leopold Strong every single time we play the game. Never changes it up. Just loves the guy. Loves that giant beefcake. And I think, you know, people are gonna really find a killer that they love and want to play as, which is one of my favorite things about it, is just getting to have people experience the worlds and the characters that I create in a brand new way that's not comics related.
I mean, look, I as someone who plays a lot of tabletop games and things like that, like when I heard that this was an element of it, I was like, oh, yeah, this sounds great. So for those listening, I just want to do a little bit of business on this point. The guys are doing every issue of the comic, whether you buy like the cover A or whatever, will have a card on it on the back cover, right? So you can either choose to buy 2 copies of the cover A if you want, or any of the covers, and cut one out, and you can keep one pristine. We love you buying 2 copies, but if your retailer has a polybagged version of the book, the card will come separate with that. And I can only imagine there will be fun and shenanigans had there. But as of right now, like, that is a way where if you don't want to buy 2 copies, or you don't care about ruining your first copy, then great. Those are your options.
Yes.
But then, right, like, what you're going to want to do is tell your retailer, hey, I need all of the cards, so put me down for the first 13 issues on day 1. So
Yeah.
that way you can make sure you get them in the form that you want every time.
So the card game is for 4 to 12 players. Mm-hmm. Technically speaking, once you get to issue 4, you'll have 4 killer cards. You could play the game right then, like a simplified version of the game. But as the killers come out, or as the issues come out, and you get all the killers, we will be revealing how the actual game will be able to be purchased, because there is going to be a boxed version of the game with more pieces than just the killer cards. But you can play, if you buy all 12 issues, you will have, or all 13 issues, you will have all of the killer cards, and you will be able to play the game. So it's I kind of love this idea of, like, buy the comics, play the game for free. You know,
dude, it's one of those things where, like, I was telling James this the other day, where, like, this, not only does this book, like we said, feel big, right? It really feels like a way that you guys can almost build a community around it in that sense, right? Like, outside of, the cosplay elements of the character designs, but the card game, but also, who doesn't love this person can surely beat this person kind of discussion, right? Like, people are always talking about who's stronger than the other, and because you've got this cast, like, that kind of discussion gets to be had here, even if your favorite character dies in the first issue, right? Like, I think that's one of those what really makes this feel like the full package. And what my hope is, right? I talk about this all the time, in that there is there's nothing like walking into a comic shop, right? And having a regular comic shop, and knowing the regulars that kind of go in and out. Some comic shops are game shops, and so to be able to, if you've got a friend who's not reading this book and you feel like they really should, like, it's easier to, this is a book that's super easy to recommend, in a sense, because then everyone else in the shop can start talking about it. And it's from, two of the best, it's from the minds of 2 of the best in the biz, or, James and Michael. Like, these guys are no slouches. And so I, like I said, I'm super excited for this. I think this is going to be, I know, like, right, like, oh, well, this is the Image podcast, you guys have to say good things about Image, but, like, look, no, but realistically, right, like, there's a lot of books on shelves, And this one, not only will it stand out on the shelf just based off its cover design, is one that I think it's going to get a lot of people talking. And look, no one likes FOMO, right? And so just pick the book up.
No one likes FOMO.
Right?
No one likes FOMO.
No one likes FOMO. Everyone hates not being in on the cool book, and this is going to be it. Michael, I have taken up a tremendous amount of your time so far today, so I appreciate you kind of chatting through all of this. Like I said, like it's inevitably what Exquisite Corpses feels like to me is everything that you've done with you kind of set. It feels like the blueprint you set on Silver Coin, but on steroids in a way. And so to see how you have grown as a creator, just even from Silver Coin to where we are now, is nothing short of I think inspiring. And I think it's one of the things I love about doing these chats is like there are a ton of people who are trying to figure out a way to break into the business. And I think for those folks to know that look, every day is a unique challenge, and you only get better by doing the reps. Everything you've done is a clear example of that. And so, so thanks, man. Appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you all next time. Appreciate it. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. A huge thanks to Michael Walsh for coming on and talking shop. Look, whether it's Silver Coin, Null Hunter, or Exquisite Corpses, the dude is doing some of the most exciting creator-owned work that's out there right now, especially at Image. So if you haven't picked up his stuff, do yourself a favor and fix that. And trust me, if you're listening to this before the pre-order for Exquisite Corpses, tell your retailer you need multiple copies, because this is going to be one that you're going to read over and over and over again. I'm excited for it, and I'm excited to see what more he has coming up in the future. So, as always, thank you for listening to the show. If you liked the episode, leave a rating, a review, and just yell about it online. Whatever works. I don't care. We've got more great guests coming up, so stay tuned and keep on reading comics, because as long as you keep reading them, we'll keep talking about them. We'll catch you next time.